Gatsby here. Let's take a walk. Growing up, I was a huge fan of Power Rangers. It's something that I watched week to week, and most certainly was the foundation of why I love Mecha. Sorry, Wing Gundam, they were technically here for me first. Even as an adult, long after the point in my life where I decided that I was too old for spandex warriors beating up on rubber monsters of the week, which led me to give away my small collection of Megazords. And not long after the point when I immediately regretted that decision, my dad turned on the television to Nickelodeon where an episode of Power Rangers Ninja Steel was airing and said, "Hey Gatsby, look, isn't it crazy that they're still making this show?" In that moment, I was sent back in time to an event in 2001 where my dad took us to see people dressed up as Power Rangers Time Force characters at the Toys R Us. And after snapping back to reality, knowing damn well that my dad will probably watch this video, I didn't have the heart to tell him that, yeah, that's Ninja, and it was probably the worst one I put up with after catching up to every series after Jetman. My start with Super Sentai is a bit more complicated. In the early years of the internet, I remember being at my grandmother's house using dial-up to download funny pictures of what I now know are not bloopers, but instead just Dai Ranger and Kaku Ranger mech fights. Similar to anime, where I didn't know that it came from Japan until 2006 with Naruto, I had a vague awareness that Power Rangers was a Japanese thing, I just didn't realize how different it was until sometime after the summer of 2013. When a friend of mine on an old streaming group I used to frequent streamed Go Busters vs. Gozyuger v Cinema. And when the dinosaur-themed Zyuden Sentai Kyoryuger arrived, I started cracking jokes about how these battery jockeys weren't my Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but they seemed fun and ultimately it sparked an interest into seeing what the two teams that were featured had to offer. So as a college student with more alcohol than sense, in about a week I finished the entirety of Kaizoku Sentai Gokyger, immediately followed by watching the entirety of Tokume Sentai Go Buster. And from that point, I was hooked. I started watching every series that was referenced in Gokyger, even if I had inadvertently spoiled the endings to Jetman or the fate of one of the Time Ranger characters. It was a sort of trip down memory lane watching shows that were similar but different from the ones from my childhood. And if you want an example of how this felt, some channel named Austin McConnell made a video about Time Ranger, which will be linked in the description. And Time Ranger was so good for him that he even ended up making a follow-up video talking about Jetman, a series that, despite never getting adapted into the US, overperformed on his channel and broke more than 1 million views. So after 50 years of weekly episodes and almost 3 decades of being an enjoyer, I wanted to talk about the indefinite hiatus of Super Sentai, because I believe that it's a franchise that looks better than 90% of the garbage that goes straight to Disney Plus, and still gets regularly overlooked due to existing for the sole purpose of selling toys to 7-year-olds, and attractive men and women to Japanese parents who are forced to watch it with their kids. On October 30th, 2025, an announcement was made that Super Sentai would come to an indefinite hiatus following the conclusion of number 1 Sentai Gozyuger. Of course, Kamen Rider will stick around, and we even got the continued tradition of passing the torch at the end of the season by handing it off to John Metal Heroes. But important to note, this announcement was made in the middle of a season that was already covered in controversy. The half-Filipino actress cast as Gozu Unicorn, Maya Imamori, became the target of a tabloid rag that pushed the claim that she had an extramarital affair with Asai Kosuke, also known as the suit actor for the Red of the series Gozu Wolf. The claims quietly subsided after Kosuke retired due to a worsening chronic illness that was believed to be related to epilepsy. But what followed later on November 8th, 2025 was a decision that no one could have expected, with Imamori being dropped entirely from her talent agency due to a video surfacing of the actress appearing to be drunk 4 months prior to reaching the legal drinking age of 20 years old. In the West, most Americans shrugged it off, with the legal drinking age being regularly ignored anyway at the age of 21, and in Europe, drinking ages begin between ages 16 and 18 to cope with the fact of being European. In Japan, however, they saw this as an irredeemable action not fit for somebody who was expected to be a role model on a television show made for children. Had she waited 4 months, not only would it have been legal, it would have been culturally encouraged to go out drinking with your coworkers after a long day of being a unicorn. What was probably the most interesting part of this conflict for me, however, is that it just so happened to occur during the time that I was in Japan. And although I was legitimately excited to watch an absolute hood classic straight from the tap, instead what I got was a Stalin-esque erasure of a person from a franchise in an episode edited so painfully awkward, you would have thought that Imamori had killed somebody. With the removal of both the intro and outro, the entire episode was riddled with absurdly bizarre crops and last-second edits of voice lines that didn't fit the characters, including dubbing over the voice of another actress while the character was in suit. What didn't help was that the series was put on an immediate 1-week hiatus due to the literal next episode being a focus episode on, yep, you guessed it, Imamori's character. A commercial did manage to find the light of day briefly before being removed entirely, and merch featuring the actress was either cleared out of stores or bought up quickly prior to being erased from the series. It was legitimately painful to watch, and for the remainder of the season, there's little doubt that it had a huge effect on morale in the remainder of the production. Imamori was replaced by Oni's sister Kohaku Shida of Dawn Brothers fame, but even with the replacement, the trajectory of the series had already been set down a path of oddly cropped zooms and mediocre green screens that constantly looked jarring. Some reshoots were able to be done to help ease the transfer, but simply put, other actors weren't able to participate in reshoots on the entire last quarter of the show due to other filming obligations since the series had technically already concluded filming. And so, with the two announcements being so close to each other, some speculated on what caused the death, or more accurately, indefinite hiatus of Super Sentai, and naturally, many people pointed at the backlash from Imamori's controversy. But I disagree. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, as the studio effectively stopped talking about her case entirely and just tried to close out the season to the best of their ability. This wasn't even the first time actors or actresses have vacated roles, like Miss America from Battle Fever J, who left due to a language barrier making things difficult, or Chodenshi Bioman's Yellow 4, who was killed off in episode 10 and replaced on the following episode by a new actress, likely due to talent agency disputes. This wasn't even the first legal issue with Gai Yikari, also known as Kaizoku Sentai Gokaiger's Gokai Silver, or, if you're over the age of 60, that police officer who would collect cash cards from you, resulting in fraud charges being pressed against him. There were even people who claimed it was racism due to her half-Filipino identity, to which, for the tabloid rag, I'd say if the shoe fits, but for Toei, my mind immediately goes to Nigerian-American comedic actor Ike Nwala, who ended up being a main character in Lupin Ranger vs. Pat Ranger, where a year prior, during a Vice interview, he talked about working as a comedic actor in Japan, making an effort to remove harmful stereotypes during his time on the weekly children's television program Oha Suta, or Hello Studio. And after watching Lupat, the one thing I can say is that the reason I didn't enjoy that show wasn't because there was a black guy doing a Beverly Hills Cop impression, it was that fucking French. When it comes to Maya Imamori and the associated controversy, this article from a Twitter user, Hakumai Daily, provided what I believe to be a very well-written explanation of how Japanese families interact with Japanese media. I'll also link this in the description, and I would highly recommend you give it a read if you're genuinely interested on a purely Japanese take on the matter. The main point of their post is that sponsors dictate what is allowed on the program, and in the event that something happens on or around any given series, parents can and will call to lodge complaints for any number of reasons. The series is too risque, it's too violent, it's not educational enough, my child keeps shouting a catchphrase. Sure, older fans exist in the audience, but at the end of the day, it's a children's show, and that fact can't be overlooked. So if it wasn't the fault of Gozyuger, what actually happened? Well, although it sounds boring, what I believe to be the real reason why Sentai was put on an indefinite hiatus was, simply put, the money wasn't there. In a franchise meant to sell toys, Kamen Rider has been popping the fuck off, and for the most part, after Gokaiger and Q Ranger, Sentai sales have been on a steady decline, with the exception of Dawn Brothers. This might also be directly correlated with the fact that Toei sold international distribution, merchandise, and toy rights to Saban Entertainment back in 1992, which have since been transferred over to Hasbro as of May 2018. Another topic regularly brought up was that the formula had already been done to exhaustion, and in an interview with Shinichiro Shirakura, he pointed that Kamen Rider had already been encroaching on the territory of Sentai as a major cause for the decision being considered as early as 2007 with Kamen Rider Den-O. Sure, changes can be made to the formula by making a dozen Rangers, or having Gokai Red show up to drop more Ranger keys, or copying a Kamen Rider trope of putting Rangers against each other, or working with Sony visual production stages with LED walls instead of using traditional green screens, have Gokai Red show up for another cameo to drop even more Ranger keys, or just make the show watchable like Dawn Brother. But regardless of what was being done in the franchise, it just seemed to struggle to bring in the big bucks that were regularly being met next door in Kamen Rider. Made even more difficult when you have series like Kamen Rider Saber, at the time featuring more riders than the currently airing Kira Major and Zenkaiger combined, and doing fiscally better than both of them combined. there's gonna be some questions. Concluding the Gozyuger finale on February 8th, 2026, it was a difficult time for fans of the franchise who felt justifiably cheated out of a grand finale. During an interview with lead producer Daigo Matsura and screenwriter Akiko Inoue, they stated that it supposedly had been decided for several years that Gozyuger would be the final chapter in Sentai, with Matsura only finding out about this around episode 10. Giving credit to one of the stranger theories at the time published online, claiming that there was a hidden countdown being placed in the logos that sounds almost not entirely schizophrenic at this point, Matsura continues that in the final episode there's a scene where issues of the recasting became very visibly apparent, and it was almost funny how heavily the cast change impacted the final product, which left him feeling frustrated. A feeling that I feel fans of the series had to have resonated with. Despite all that happened, they still hope that people see the final product for what it was and that they're grateful for the continuous support that they've been getting from the fans. Admittedly, I'm a bit sad that Sentai is gone, if only temporarily, but with Power Rangers being in arguably a worse than dead state, with people threatening revivals of AI reboots of Mighty Morphin, I guess it could be worse? To which, and I already know I'm gonna get crucified for this video on Toku Twitter anyway for having an opinion, but holy shit guys, get over it. Mighty Morphin isn't even the best series. What the hell are you people doing with your life? At the end of the day, I'm just glad that I was able to watch a franchise I grew up with people who enjoyed it just as much as I did. The writing was on the wall for a while, and hey, even though I've never been a Metal Heroes fan, maybe I'll check out a few episodes. Kamen Rider has started to simulcast episodes as they air on their YouTube channel with their most recent season Kamen Rider Zets, and there are whispers that maybe that's the eventual future for the Project Red series. But as this chapter comes to a close, I look forward to the eventual revival of Super Sentai. Because at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that the real reason Super Sentai ended up getting cancelled was because Ninja was so fucking